In this episode, I'm going to talk about this Usher AU-8500II pre-main amplifier, as Usher calls it, or as you and I would call it, integrated amplifier. I couldn't really find out much about Usher. I believe they're a company located in Taiwan that makes audio gear. As best I can tell, this was made around 2009. It sold for about $385 or about $550 in 2024 money. It was rated at 135 watts per channel into 8 ohms at not more than 0.01% THD and had a frequency response from 20 Hz to 20 kilohertz of plus or minus 0.2 dB. It weighs in at about 31 pounds. It is controllable by a remote, and what I'm going to do is give you a tour of the front and the back. I'll pop the cover off, we'll look inside there, then I'll show you the data that I measured, and I'll talk about my experience listening to it.
Here is a close-up view of the Usher AU-8500II. On-off switch is over here, our speaker switch is over here, and LEDs come on when they're engaged. 1/4-inch headphone jack is right there. Bass, mid, and treble controls are there. If you want to bypass the tone controls, you can press this guy right here. And an LED will come on telling you that the tone is either activated or not. We have a mono switch here and a loudness switch there. We also have an LED for the direct switch, which is this guy right here. And I talk about that direct function a little later on in the video, actually towards the end of the video. Balance control is here, volume control is here, and then you have all your different inputs. There's 2 tape monitor loops, and you have auxiliary DAT, CD, and 2 video inputs as well as a tuner input. This obviously is the rear of the 8500II. We have a plethora of inputs. These are our 2 outputs here. There's a direct output as well as a tape record output. We have 2 switched outlets here and here, 1 unswitched outlet there. User replaceable speaker fuses, a line fuse there, and then we have our connections for the speakers. They're 3-way binding post kind of speakers, so they'll take a banana jack, or you can put a spade lug in, or just a wire through these guys. Here is a view of the inside of the AU-7500, looking from the top down, and from this view you can kind of see our heat sinks here, and then we have a front circuit board here. This is the one that the controls are mounted to up front, the switches and all that stuff. And in this view you can see kind of, this is the rear of the unit. You can see the big toroidal transformer, and these are the capacitors that are in here. There's a close-up view of what's under this. This actually is a power supply board, and here is a different view of your front panel board. It does have a remote control, and this is part of the volume control. And you can see that there's relays here that select all the different inputs. Here is just another view of the Usher AU-8500. You can kind of see the speaker relays here, and a lot of their resistors are labeled with their name on it. It's kind of interesting. You can see the capacitors are 80 volt, 10,000 microfarads for the power supply, and kind of just a little bit more of what's going on with the inside of this guy. Here's just another view. Here's another small circuit board that you can see. So this guy right here is the standby power supply board, and just another close-up view of that big toroidal transformer. Here we have the Usher putting out 5 watts into 8 ohm loads, and the volume control has been adjusted to give a gain of about 28 dB, a little bit over that. The SNRs are right around 84 dB, and our THD is about 0.1%, we'll call it. The specification that I could find said the THD should be better than 0.01%, but I'm pretty happy with 0.1% here. Now, I should point out I'm using the direct input. There is only one direct input. You cannot use the direct function for anything other than the direct input. And when the tone controls don't work when you use the direct input. So we'll go look and see how it does with one of the other inputs, the DAT or CD probably, and see if it makes a difference in the SNRs or the THDs. So all I did is move the input over from direct to DAT, and I didn't change the volume control settings, and you have to touch a switch on the front. You have to turn it one way to select the direct off. And what we have here is our power went up from 5 watts to 6.3 watts, we'll call it. Our THD went down just a smidgen from 0.09 something to 0.08 something. However, the SNR dropped maybe 11 dB. It was around 82, 83, and now it's around 71. So that is the effect of the direct, using the direct input. And you'll see in a little while when we look at the frequency response measurement how much of a difference the direct input makes. Now, if I go ahead and lower the power down, let me just do that real quickly to get 5 watts, and we'll see if it makes that much difference. So it didn't really change the SNRs, and the THDs, not really. They're both around 0.09. So it did mainly affect the SNRs, which got worse. With the DAT input or the CD input, I guess, would be under the same thing. However, now I could use the tone controls if I want. The tone controls will be bypassed except when I go to measure them. This plot shows the frequency response from 10 hertz to 50 kilohertz with the Usher putting out 5 watts into 8 ohms. Now, the specification that I could find was that from 20 hertz to 20 kilohertz, it should be plus or minus 0.2 dB. And we're probably doing that here at 50 kilohertz, but definitely at 20 kilohertz, we're within 0.2 dB. That would be over here. However, if we come down to 20 hertz, we're down 2 dB right there, and even at 10 hertz, it's way down. Now, I should point out that I'm using the DAT input, and I have the tone controls off, and I'm going to try it in the direct mode. It does have a direct mode input, and I'm going to try that and see if this thing improves at all. So right now I hooked my input to the direct input, and I selected the direct input from the front. Now there is only one direct input, but it really cleans up the low end right here. It's definitely meeting the requirement at 10 hertz, which is better than the 20 hertz where they actually spec their measurement. So it's pretty well flat. At 20 kilohertz, we're only down to maybe 0.2 of a dB. So it basically didn't change the high-end performance at 20 kilohertz, but it definitely improved the low end. So I think it's kind of screwy that you have nearly 6 dB of loss at 10 hertz on this particular unit unless you use the direct input. And also when you use the direct input, the tone controls have no effect, as would kind of make sense. Here is a plot of the Usher's output impedance from 20 hertz to 20 kilohertz. If I use the lowest value for the output impedance, which would be the left channel, we'll say right around 1 kilohertz, it's about 0.18 ohms, and that will yield a damping factor of about 44. There was no specification for the damping factor that I could find. These plots show the Usher's crosstalk from 20 hertz to 20 kilohertz with the active channel putting out 5 watts into 8 ohms. Now, the upper two traces, this one and this one, would be for the direct input, and the lower traces, this guy and this guy, would be for the DAT input. And the direct input has a better crosstalk, and worst case for it would be around, 47 dB maybe, and for the DAT input, the worst case is 25 dB here. And that's all at the high frequency part of the band. They don't look too different until they get to maybe 300-400 hertz. And then the crosstalk starts diminishing for the DAT inputs. There is no specification for the multi-tone response of the Usher. However, using the direct input, it's showing between 11 to 13 bits of distortion-free range. This plot shows the THD versus frequency for a couple different output power levels, and that's into 8 ohms, and I am using the direct input. Once again, the specification on THD was less than 0.01%. Pretty much we're less than 0.1%. It gets a little bit here, but maybe it's 0.12%. But so it really looks pretty good across the band regardless of the power level. Speaking of power level, minus 2.1 is the equivalent of about 52 watts into 8 ohms, and then it drops by 3 watts until we get to minus 11.1, which would be about 6.5 watts into 8 ohms. Here we have the Usher putting out 136 watts into 8 ohms, and the specification is that it should do 135 watts into 8 ohms at less than 0.01%. Well, once again, we're not at 0.01%, but the 0.03% or 0.04%, I guess if you do your rounding, is pretty darn good. Our SNRs are up around 94 dB. That's pretty good. So with the Usher using the direct input, and the volume control is also set for a little bit over 28 dB of gain, we easily can get 136 watts into 8 ohms. I'm going to go ahead and bring up the power and see how much it can do before it gets ugly. Well, right there at 152 watts, it's up over 1% THD, or right at 1%, and it's starting to look pretty ugly, and our SNRs have dropped. So I'm going to say that maybe this thing could have a headroom at 150 watts, but 135 watts is probably a pretty good number for this guy. Here I've switched over to the DAT input from the direct input, and I adjusted my input signal level so I could get 136 watts, well, at least into the right channel. In the left channel, it's 131 watts. The gain goes up when you go into, say, the DAT mode or the CD mode a little bit. It's a little over 29 dB instead of a bit over 28 dB. Our SNRs have decreased, like we saw with the 5 watt into 8 ohm test when you go into the DAT mode, and the THD stayed pretty much the same, about 0.04%. So we're basically meeting our power requirement. I mean, the THD should be 0.01% or better, but I don't really care that it's 0.04%. And other than that, it's looking about the same. So I'm going to go ahead and see if there's any difference in the max power I can hit before it starts looking ugly. I kind of doubt it, but we'll see what happens as I increase the power. Yeah, we're over 2% at 160 watts. So let me go ahead and turn that off. So our distortion has gone up quite a bit for, I believe, a little bit more power than we had applied with the direct input. But once again, this amplifier is rated at 135 watts into 8 ohms, and that's probably a real good rating for it. In case you were wondering what was going on with the harmonics, here we have the Usher putting out 100 watts into 8 ohms, and it's using the direct input. And it's the standard kind of harmonics you expect. The odd harmonics are higher than the even harmonics, or at least the third harmonic is higher than the second or even harmonic. Here we are looking at the system noise level of the Usher. In this case, I've selected the DAT input, and I've terminated both those inputs. So we're just looking at the noise with the volume control set to give 29 dB of gain. And we predominantly have a lot of noise low level, maybe in the 90 dB range, except for some of these power supply spikes here there's one there at 60, another there at 180 hertz. So it's kind of something that I'm guessing I will hear when I hook this up to some speakers, but it shouldn't be that loud as far as the little bit of hum caused by these two guys. This plot shows the effect of the Usher's loudness switch, and I'm just showing the left channel. The right channel was affected by the same amount. And I'm using the DAT input because the direct input bypasses the loudness switch. So this blue trace right here, this is our flat trace, and then when we flip in the loudness, we get this response here, and we are going from 20 hertz to 20 kilohertz. You can see that we get kind of the standard smiley face, kind of a boost with the loudness. You get a couple dB, maybe 5 dB of boost here at the very high end, and then at the low end of the band, you get probably 7-8 dB of boost, depending what part of the frequency band, and this just kind of shows you its effect. This plot shows the IMD response of the Usher. In this case, the two tones are at 19 kilohertz and 20 kilohertz, which would be right here. And the 1 kilohertz tone, which is this guy right here, is down pretty low. And then these others are your power supply hums, so they don't really count in the IMD. And here's your tones that are up around 38, 40 kilohertz, so they're down pretty far. But as far as the overall IMD response, it looks pretty good. Here's our THD SNR plot at 1 kilohertz with the Usher putting out 5 watts into 4 ohm loads. Now I am using the direct input, and when you compare it to the 8 ohm load case, there's very little difference. It's a little bit better on THD with the 8 ohm load case, and it's a little bit better with SNRs, maybe 2 dB better. But other than that, it's pretty much the same between the 8 ohm or the 4 ohm load. Here we have the Usher putting out 205 watts into 4 ohm loads at 1 kilohertz. And you can see that we've got pretty good THDs and SNRs. What I'm going to do is increase the power a little bit, and we'll see how much we can get out of it before it starts really looking like crap. And we'll go up a little bit at a time. There is no specification for the 4 ohm load power. And also, I should point out, I'm using the direct input. So we're looking pretty good. Right about here, the THD is starting to take a little bit of a dump, but we're still not too bad. We're less than 0.1%. Go a little bit more. It's starting to look kind of bad here at 230 watts. Probably can go up one more notch. So 232 watts into 4 ohm loads, and we're at SNRs around 49 dB. That's not very good. So we'll say it can do 235 watts into 4 ohm loads. Here we have the frequency response of the Usher from 10 hertz to 50 kilohertz, with it putting out 5 watts into 4 ohm loads, and I am using the direct input. And when you compare it to the 8 ohm load case under the same situations, you'll find that at 50K, the 4 ohm response is better. And at the high end of the band right here, you're down maybe 0.4 of a dB. With the 8 ohm load case, it was down maybe 0.7 of a dB at 50 kilohertz. And at 10 hertz, it's a little bit worse here with the 4 ohm load than it is with the 8 ohm load, but we're talking maybe 0.1 of a dB difference. So it does look a little bit better with 4 ohm loads as far as the frequency response. And in case you were wondering what the harmonics look like at 200 watts into 4 ohm loads, pretty much the same. The third harmonic or odd harmonic is higher than the second or even harmonic, which is what you would expect for a solid state amplifier. This plot shows the input to input isolation. In this case, it's between the DAT input and the CD inputs. And in this case also, we have a signal being applied to the DAT input to create this reference line here at the top. And then the CD input was selected, and it had its inputs terminated into shorts, and that is this trace here. And so what it basically shows you is how much of the DAT input signal is bleeding over and being picked up by the CD input signal. And at worst case, we would be about 65 dB right here at 20 kilohertz, and it improves. This area right here and right here is probably due to power supply noise that's coming through. But For the most part, it's better than 65 dB, which is pretty good for the input-to-input isolations that I've measured.
The test data showed mixed results for the AU-8500II's performance, at least this one's. The power output was right where it should be. It had no problem doing 135 watts into 8 ohms. Now the distortion was supposed to be better than 0.01%. This guy was probably not worse than 0.1%, which to me is not a big deal. Also, there were no specs for 4 ohm loads, but it seemed to work fine into 4 ohm loads. The area that it had problem with using the data input, I also tried the CD input, was that low frequency response, and that was just down too many dB at the low part of the band. The frequency response at the high end of the band looked really good. Now when you went to the direct input, and I'll talk about the direct input in just a little bit more, it looked just fine. The frequency response was pretty well flat across the band. At the high end of the band, at least at 50 kilohertz, it was down a couple tenths of a dB, I believe. But it did look much better as far as going straight through the AU-8500 in the direct mode. Now, the other thing I would point out is that for the testing, I had the tone control switched out, and the loudness control was obviously off. The tone controls were all set mid-range, and the balance control was set mid-range. So it actually had fairly good channel balance when it was in the DAT mode, and also when it was in the direct mode. As far as listening tests to this, I hooked it up to my Wilson Wah-3 Puppy 2 loudspeakers and used my little Surfans player. I listened to a variety of music using the DAT input, and it sounded fine if I put the loudness on. If I didn't have the loudness on and the tone out, I thought the bass was a little thin. You could also put the tone on and crank up the bass a little bit, and even the treble a little bit, I thought. But when I put the loudness on, it did a real good job. It had plenty of bass. This guy has plenty of power. It didn't get hot after my listening session, and as far as just the sound, I thought it sounded just fine once you put on the loudness or boost the bass control. At this point, I decided it was time to listen to the direct inputs, so I powered the unit down, plugged in my Surfans F20 into the direct in RCA jacks, powered it back up, and bloom! It was full bore, or almost full loudness, and the volume control had absolutely no effect. I powered it back down, and that was as much as I listened to the direct in. Apparently that just goes right into the amplifier, and there's not even a volume control on it. Now, this was around 2009. I don't really think there were streamers or DACs that had apps for controlling the volume in them in that period of time. I mean, this thing still has a video in jack. So I'm not sure the purpose of having that direct input without at least the volume control on a piece of gear. But, so I didn't listen to anything other than that real loud burst, and I'm glad nothing got blown up as far as my ears or even this amplifier or the speakers. They can handle more than that. But anyway, no harm, no foul, just a little bit of excitement in my afternoon. So be that as it may, overall, if you were to get one of these things, be aware of that. Maybe you can tell me what the purpose of having a direct in that really just goes right into the amplifier and you can't even limit the volume on it. I guess today it might have a little bit more purpose, but back then it didn't, that I can tell. I'm not sure what these sell for. If you find one, it's not a bad unit as far as the sound quality. Hopefully yours doesn't have the low frequency response problem. I can't say that's common to all the Ushers back then. I doubt it, but at least this one has a problem with that. But other than that, for where this is used in my friend's treatment room, it's just fine, and even that low frequency response isn't any big deal because it's not in a critical listening environment. So, if you came across one for the right price, go for it. Once again, if you have any comments, please leave them. I respond to all of them, or I try to. If you haven't subscribed to the channel, please do so. And if you like the video, hit the like button. It always helps with YouTube's algorithm for the channel. So anyway, I hope you will do that. And until next time, have a great day or night.